Hey everyone, welcome back. If you're here, you already know that Sauron was one of the most terrifying forces in Middle-earth. The Dark Lord who forged the One Ring commanded armies of orcs and nearly crushed the free peoples under his shadow. But here's something that might surprise you. Sauron wasn't even close to being the most powerful being in Tolkien's world. Today we're going deep into the lore, pulling from the books, the Silmarillion, Tolkien's letters, and those obscure passages that most people skip over. We're talking about 10 beings who could have absolutely dominated Sauron if circumstances had been different. Some of these names you know, but I guarantee the reasons why they're more powerful will blow your mind. So let's get into it. First up, we need to talk about Ungoliant. You might remember Shelob from the Two Towers, a massive spider that nearly killed Frodo in Cirith Ungol. Shelob was terrifying, sure, but she was nothing compared to her mother. Ungoliant was an ancient evil that existed before even the sun and moon were created. In the Silmarillion, Tolkien describes how she came from the darkness beyond the world, from the void itself. Wasn't a Maiar like Sauron. She wasn't even part of the divine order that LOTR created. She was something else entirely, something that existed in the outer darkness and fed on light itself. The craziest part about Ungoliant's power shows up during the destruction of the two trees of Valinor. Melkor, who was basically Sauron's boss and infinitely more powerful than him, needed Ungoliant's help to achieve his greatest act of evil. Together, they went to Valinor, the land of the gods, and Ungoliant drained the two trees completely. She sucked out every bit of light from these massive divine trees that illuminated the whole world. But here's where it gets insane. After drinking that light, she became so powerful and so hungry that she turned on Melkor himself. The Dark Lord who had fought against all the Valar, who had corrupted countless Maiar, including Sauron, was suddenly terrified of what he'd unleashed. When Melkor refused to give her all the Silmarils he'd stolen, Ungoliant attacked him. The Silmarillion describes how she wrapped him in her webs and began to strangle him. Melkor, the most powerful being ever to walk Middle-earth besides the Valar themselves, screamed in terror. His cry was so loud and so desperate that it echoed through the mountains of Middle-earth and brought his Balrogs running to save him. Think about that for a second. Sauron served Melkor right. Sauron was Melkor's lieutenant, his second in command, but Ungoliant nearly killed Melkor in single combat. The Balrogs had to swarm her with their whips of flame just to drive her away, and even then, they couldn't destroy her. What makes Ungoliant even more terrifying than Sauron is that she couldn't be controlled or reasoned with. Sauron was kind of strategic, always planning centuries ahead, but Ungoliant had only one drive, consuming everything. She ate light, she ate matter, she grew larger and more powerful with everything she devoured. After fleeing from the Balrogs, she went south and eventually consumed herself in her own hunger, according to the legends. That's not a confirmed death, by the way. Tolkien left it deliberately vague. She might have just disappeared into the darkness, still out there somewhere. Sauron needed the One Ring to maintain his power and influence. He poured so much of himself into that ring that when it was destroyed, he was reduced to nothing. Ungoliant never needed any external object or artifact. Her power was intrinsic, growing with each feeding. In one of his letters, Tolkien mentioned that Ungoliant represented the negation of creation itself, the appetite that seeks to reduce everything to nothing. That's a fundamentally different kind of evil than Sauron's desire to dominate and order everything under his will. There's also something crucial in how other beings reacted to them. The Valar were willing to go to war against Melkor, and eventually did, chaining him up in their stronghold. But with Ungoliant, they didn't even try to pursue her after she fled. She was too unpredictable, too dangerous, operating on a level of chaos that even the gods didn't want to engage with directly. Sauron could be fought with armies and strategy. Ungoliant was more like a natural disaster, a black hole that consumed everything in its path. The last thing to understand about Ungoliant's superiority over Sauron is her legacy. Shelob wasn't just some random giant spider. She was Ungoliant's daughter, and even as a much lesser being, she held territory that Sauron himself didn't dare enter. In the Two Towers, Tolkien makes it clear that Sauron knew about Shelob and deliberately left her alone. He didn't command her or control her. He tolerated her presence in Cirith Ungol because trying to remove her would have been more trouble than it was worth. If Sauron was afraid to deal with Ungoliant's distant offspring, imagine what the mother herself could have done to him. Now, let's shift gears completely and talk about Tom Bombadil. If you've only watched the movies, you missed him entirely. And honestly, that's one of Peter Jackson's biggest cuts. In the Fellowship of the Ring book, Tom Bombadil shows up right after the hobbits escape the old forest. He seems like this jolly singing guy who speaks in rhymes and doesn't take anything seriously. But pay close attention to what actually happens in those chapters, because it's some of the strangest stuff Tolkien ever wrote. When the hobbits get trapped by Old Man Willow, a malevolent tree spirit that's trying to crush and drown them, Tom Bombadil just shows up and commands it to stop. Not asks, commands. He speaks to the tree, and it immediately releases the hobbits. Then they go to his house and meet his wife Goldberry, and everything seems nice and peaceful. But here's where it gets weird. Frodo asks Goldberry who Tom Bombadil is, and she gives this cryptic answer about him being the master of wood, water, and hill. When Frodo asks Tom directly, Tom says he was here before the river and the trees, before the first raindrop and the first acorn. The next day, Tom takes the hobbits through where they get captured by a Barrow Wight. These are ancient evil spirits that inhabited the graves of long-dead kings. The Wight puts the hobbits under a spell and is about to sacrifice them when Tom shows up again. He doesn't fight the Wight, he just commands it to leave, and it vanishes instantly. Then Tom reaches into the barrow and pulls out ancient blades from Westernessa, giving them to the hobbits. One of those blades, by the way, is what Merry uses to stab the Witch King at the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, the only weapon that could break the dark magic protecting him. But here's the part that proves Tom is more powerful than Sauron. Frodo offers him the One Ring. Not like he wants to give it away, but Tom asks to see it, so Frodo hands it over. Tom puts the ring on his finger, and nothing happens. He doesn't turn invisible, he doesn't feel its corruption, he just laughs and hands it back. Then, to show he's completely unaffected, he makes the ring disappear and reappear like a magic trick. Frodo, already feeling the ring's pull after just a few weeks of carrying it, watches in amazement as Tom treats the most powerful object in Middle-earth like a toy. Later, when the Fellowship is being formed at Rivendell, Gandalf brings up Tom Bombadil as a possible solution. Maybe they could give the ring to Tom, since he's not affected by it. But Elrond and Gandalf agree that Tom wouldn't understand the importance of keeping it safe. He'd probably just throw it away or forget about it, because he doesn't care about the affairs of the world outside his borders. Galadriel says that if all other defenses fell, Tom Bombadil would also fall, not through conquest, because his land would be the last refuge, and eventually darkness would take even that. Tolkien was asked multiple times who or what Tom Bombadil was, and he deliberately never gave a straight answer. In his letters, he said that Tom represents the spirit of the countryside itself, or maybe something that existed before even the Valar entered the world. Some scholars think Tom might be a Valar who chose to remain in Middle-earth instead of going to Valinor. But that doesn't quite fit, because the Valar couldn't resist the ring's power. Others think he might be an avatar of Eru Ilvator himself, the one true god of Tolkien's universe. But that seems to direct for how Tolkien usually worked. What we know for certain is that Tom Bombadil has absolute mastery over his domain. Trees obey him, evil spirits flee from him, and the One Ring has zero effect on him. Sauron poured the majority of his power into that ring specifically to dominate the wills of others. Tom's complete immunity to it suggests he operates on a different level of existence entirely. He's not playing the same game as Sauron, Gandalf, or anyone else in Middle-earth. He's something older and fundamentally different. The reason Tom is more powerful than Sauron isn't because he could beat him in a fight. It's because Sauron's entire power structure, his whole philosophy of domination through the ring, is completely meaningless to Tom. Sauron spent thousands of years crafting the perfect tool of control, and Tom just laughs at it and makes it disappear.
Ow.
That's a level of power that transcends what Sauron could even comprehend. Existing outside the framework of power that defines everyone else in the story?
X.
Next, we need to discuss Gandalf the White. And this is where a lot of people get confused, because they think of Gandalf as this wise old wizard who needed the hobbits and Aragorn to actually defeat Sauron. But that's not the whole story. When Gandalf returns after fighting the Balrog in Moria, he's been transformed. The Grey Pilgrim died in the depths under Khazad-dûm, and what came back was something closer to what Gandalf truly was before the Valar sent him to Middle-earth. See, Gandalf is a Maiar, the same order of divine beings as Sauron. In the Silmarillion and Unfinished Tales, we learn that his true name is Olorine, Iana, and he served Manwe and Valinor before being sent to Middle-earth. When the Valar decided to send help against Sauron, they deliberately chose Maiar and restricted their power. They were sent in the form of old men, forbidden from matching Sauron's power directly or dominating the peoples of Middle-earth. Their job was to inspire and guide, not to rule or fight like gods. Gandalf the Grey was working under these massive restrictions for 2,000 years. Every time he faced serious danger, like the Balrog or the Nazgul, he was fighting with one hand tied behind his back. When he fell in Moria, he actually died. Tolkien confirmed this in his letters, explaining that Gandalf's spirit left his body and went beyond the world. Then Eru Ilúvatar himself sent him back, not as the Grey Pilgrim bound by restrictions, but as the White, with significantly more power available to him. The difference shows up immediately when Gandalf returns. In the Two Towers, he faces down Saruman at Orthanc, and literally breaks his staff with a word. Saruman was another Maiar who had fallen to evil, similar to Sauron but less powerful. The old Gandalf struggled against Saruman and was imprisoned by him. The new Gandalf destroys his power without even raising his own staff. At Minas Tirith, Gandalf holds off the Witch King, the most powerful of the Nazgul, at the gates of the city. The Witch King was enhanced by Sauron's power and had been undefeated for thousands of years. But Gandalf stands against him without backing down. In Tolkien's letters, particularly Letter 156, he addresses the question of whether Gandalf could have defeated Sauron directly. His answer is fascinating. He says that if Gandalf had been allowed to reveal his full power as a Maiar, he could have faced Sauron, and likely won. But that would have violated his entire mission. The Istari were sent to Middle-earth specifically because the Valar didn't want to solve the problem themselves. They wanted the Free Peoples to resist evil through their own strength and courage, with guidance from the wizards. Think about what this means. Sauron was also a Maiar, originally named Mairon, who served all before being corrupted by Melkor. At his peak, before he poured his power into the ring, Sauron was incredibly strong, but he was never the strongest of the Maiar. In the hierarchies described in the Silmarillion, Sauron was powerful, but not exceptional among his kind. Gandalf, as Olorine, was noted for his wisdom and his service to Manwe, the king of the Valar. When the Valar chose which Maiar to send to Middle-earth, they picked Gandalf specifically because he was humble and wouldn't seek power for himself. After becoming the White, Gandalf takes on the role that Saruman abandoned. He's now the head of the Istari, the chief of the wizards in Middle-earth, but even with his increased power, he still doesn't directly assault Sauron. Instead, he orchestrates the entire strategy that leads to Sauron's defeat. Keeping Sauron's attention on the armies at the Black Gate, while Frodo and Sam reach Mount Doom, if Gandalf had wanted to, if his mission allowed it, Tolkien suggests he could have manifested as a being of light and fire and challenged Sauron directly. The key difference between Gandalf and Sauron, by the end of the War of the Ring, is that Gandalf's power was growing, while Sauron's was diminishing. Sauron had poured so much of himself into the ring that, without it, he was weaker. When Gandalf died and was sent back, he received his power directly from Eru. He didn't need an external object or artifact. His strength came from his purpose and his connection to the divine. Sauron, meanwhile, was desperately searching for the ring, because without it, he couldn't take physical form, powerful enough to dominate Middle-earth again. Let's talk about Varda, called Elbereth Gilthanil by the elves, because most people don't realize just how terrified Sauron was of her. In the Silmarillion, Varda is described as the most powerful of the female Valar, the Queen of the Stars. She's married to Manwe, the king of all the Valar, but her power is distinctly her own. Before even the sun and moon existed, Varda created the stars in the heavens. She made the constellations that the elves first saw when they awoke in Middle-earth, which is why they love her above all other Valar. What makes Varda so powerful isn't just her creative ability with the stars, it's that her very name causes physical pain to servants of darkness. In the Fellowship of the Ring, when Frodo is being hunted by the Nazgul at Weathertop, he cries out, "Oh, Elbereth Gilthanil," and the Nazgul hesitate. Later, when Sam and Frodo are in Shelob's lair, Sam invokes Elbereth and the Phial of Galadriel, which contains the light of Arendal's star blazes with power. Shelob, who feared nothing in Middle-earth except perhaps Sauron himself, recoils from that light and that name. This isn't just poetic language or religious devotion. In Tolkien's world, names have power, and the name of Varda carries actual force against evil. The Silmarillion explains that when Melkor was first corrupting Middle-earth, Varda looked down from Valinor and saw what was happening. She created new stars, brighter and more beautiful than before, specifically to give hope to the elves and to defy Melkor's shadow. Melkor hated her for this, feared her judgment, and from that point on, all his servants carried that same fear. Sauron served Melkor for thousands of years before Melkor was finally defeated and cast into the void. During all that time, Sauron would have known about Melkor's fear of Varda. When you're a lieutenant serving under the Dark Lord himself, you learn what even he respects and fears. The fact that Varda's light could hurt beings like the Nazgul, who Sauron had personally enhanced with his own power through their 9 rings, shows that her strength operates on a level Sauron can't counter. In the Silmarillion, there's a crucial passage about how Varda has never been tainted or diminished by any darkness. Unlike some of the other Valar who were wounded or troubled during the wars against Melkor, Varda remained pure and strong. Her light has never been corrupted, and because of that, it represents something fundamentally opposed to the kind of power Sauron wields. Sauron's strength came from domination, deception, and the corruption of others. Varda's power was creative, illuminating, and incorruptible. The reason most people do and think about Varda when considering beings more powerful than Sauron is because she never directly intervened. In the events of The Lord of the Rings, she remained in Valinor with the other Valar, watching from afar but not taking action herself. This was part of the Valar's decision not to directly interfere in Middle-earth after the catastrophic War of Wrath that ended the First Age. But her passive presence, the light of her stars, the power in her name, all of that continued to affect the world. Galadriel's phial, which saves Frodo and Sam multiple times, contains the light of Irindil's star. That star is actually the Silmaril that Irindil carried into the heavens, and it shines with a light that originally came from the 2 trees of Valinor. But Varda set that Silmaril in the sky and gave it purpose. When Sam raises the phial against Shelob, he's channeling Varda's power whether he knows it or not. That light drives back one of the most ancient evils remaining in Middle-earth, something that Sauron himself wouldn't challenge. If Varda had chosen to descend from Valinor and confront Sauron directly, there would have been no contest. She's a Valar, one of the actual divine powers that shaped the world. Sauron was a Maiar, a lesser spirit who served the Valar. The gap in power between them is like comparing a king to a servant. The only reason Sauron was even a threat during the Third Age was because the Valar had chosen not to intervene directly. They'd learned from previous catastrophic interventions that sometimes the cure was worse than the disease. But make no mistake, if Varda had wanted to, she could have unmade Sauron with a thought. Now we need to talk about Melian, and this is a character who doesn't get nearly enough attention for what she accomplished. Melian was a Maiar who served in the gardens of Valinor, singing to the trees and tending to the beauty of the Blessed Realm. When the elves first came to Valinor, Melian was one of the Maiar who taught them and shared in their joy. But then something unprecedented happened. She fell in love with an elf named Thingol and chose to remain in Middle-earth with him. In the Silmarillion, there's this incredible moment when Thingol first encounters Melian in the forest of Non-Elmith. They lock eyes and he stands frozen for years, literally years, just lost in her presence. When he finally comes back to himself, they've both changed. Melian has taken on a physical form that can age and exist in Middle-earth permanently, and Thingol has been transformed by her power. Together they establish the kingdom of Doriath in the woods of Regen, and this is where Melian demonstrates power that Sauron could never match. Melian created the Girdle of Melian, a magical barrier around the entire kingdom of Doriath. This wasn't just a wall or a fence, it was a fundamental alteration of reality within those borders. No one could enter Doriath unless Melian or Thingol permitted it. You could walk toward the kingdom, and suddenly find yourself turned around, walking out again without realizing what happened. Or you'd get lost in confusion and madness, wandering in circles until you gave up and left. This barrier held for thousands of years, protecting Doriath through the entire First Age. Here's what makes this so impressive. Morgoth himself, Melkor, the Dark Lord, who was infinitely more powerful than Sauron, never breached the girdle of Melian. He sent armies against Doriath, and they couldn't get through. He sent dragons and balrogs and all manner of evil creatures, and none of them could cross that barrier. Morgoth's power was so vast that he corrupted entire regions of Middle-earth just by existing in them, but he couldn't overcome what Melian had created. Sauron served Morgoth during this entire period, and he would have known that his master couldn't break through Melian's protection. The girdle only fell after Thingol died, and even then, it wasn't broken by force.
Ow.
Melian's grief at losing her husband caused her to withdraw her power, and the barrier dissolved. That tells you something crucial about the nature of her strength. It wasn't dependent on constant effort or external sources of power. It was an expression of her will and her love, so fundamental that it reshaped the land itself. When she chose to let it go, only then could Doriath be invaded. Melian also had the gift of foresight and wisdom that exceeded almost anyone else in Middle-earth. She warned Thingol about the danger of the Silmarils. She predicted the doom that would come from various choices, and she understood the deeper currents of fate that were shaping events. When Beren and Luthien came to Doriath, Melian immediately recognized what their love would mean for the future of Middle-earth. She saw things that even the Eldar, the wise elves who had lived in Valinor, couldn't perceive. The most staggering aspect of Melian's power is that she bore a child with Thingol. Luthien Tinuvil, the most beautiful being ever to walk Middle-earth, was half Maiar and half elf. This should have been impossible. The Maiar were divine spirits, not physical beings in the usual sense. For Melian to take on flesh so completely that she could conceive and bear a child meant she had mastered physical reality in a way that Sauron never did. Sauron could take on various forms, sure, but after the fall of Numenor, he lost the ability to appear fair and was trapped in a dark form. Melian maintained her chosen form for thousands of years without losing any power. Compare that to Sauron's relationship with physical reality. He needed the ring to maintain his strength. He poured his power into it because he was afraid of being diminished. After his body was destroyed in the fall of Numenor, it took him years to rebuild a physical form, and when he did, it was ugly and terrible because he didn't have enough power left to make it otherwise. Melian never needed any external object. Her power was complete in itself, maintained through her will and love, and when she finally chose to return to Valinor after Thingol's death, she did so simply by walking away. No dramatic defeat, no catastrophic end, just a quiet departure because her purpose in Middle-earth was finished. Let's move on to Manwe, and we re-getting into the realm of beings so powerful that Sauron would uneven register as a threat to them. Manwe is the king of Arda, appointed directly by Eru Ilúvatar to be the chief of all the Valar. In the Silmarillion, he's described as the one who understands most clearly the mind of Eru. He commands the winds and the airs, and nothing that happens under the sky escapes his notice. Eagles are his servants, and they watch over Middle-earth on his behalf. The difference in power between Manwe and Sauron is so vast that it's almost meaningless to compare them. Manwe is a Valar, one of the divine beings who shaped the world itself. He and the other Valar created the mountains, filled the seas, and established the very foundations of existence in Arda. Sauron is a Maiar, a servant of the Valar, specifically a servant of all before he was corrupted. Trying to compare their strength is like comparing an architect who designed a building to a janitor who later tried to vandalize it. During the First Age, when Morgoth's power had grown to the point where the elves and men could impossibly defeat him alone, the half-elf Arendelle sailed to Valinor and begged the Valar for help. Manwe listened to his plea and decided to act. The result was the War of Wrath. It's the most catastrophic conflict in the history of Middle-earth. The Valar sent an army led by Erno, Manwe's herald, and they destroyed Morgoth's forces completely. Mountains were leveled, the entire geography of Middle-earth was changed, and Morgoth himself was captured and cast into the void beyond the world. Sauron survived the War of Wrath only because he hid and surrendered. When Erno defeated Morgoth's armies, Sauron came forward and begged for mercy. Erno didn't have the authority to pardon one of the Maiar, so he told Sauron to return to Valinor and face Manwë's judgment. Instead, Sauron fled and hid in Middle-earth, eventually re-establishing himself as a Dark Lord. But the crucial point is that Sauron knew he couldn't face the power of the Valar directly. He only became a threat again because Manwe and the other Valar chose not to intervene directly in Middle-earth anymore. The reason Manwe didn't just descend from Valinor and destroy Sauron during the Third Age wasn't because he couldn't. It was a deliberate choice based on the catastrophic results of previous interventions. The War of Wrath had broken Beleriand and changed Middle-earth forever. Earlier, when the Valar first went to war against Melkor, they damaged the world so badly in their fight that they resolved to be more careful in the future. By the time of The Lord of the Rings, the Valar's policy was to send guidance and help, like the Astari, but not to solve problems directly. In Tolkien's letters, he explains this philosophy clearly. The Valar were supposed to be like angels, serving Uru's plan for the world, but not forcing outcomes through divine power. When they did intervene directly, like in the War of Wrath, the results were often as destructive as the evil they were fighting against. So Manwe chose to send the wizards to inspire the free peoples to work through indirect means. But that was a choice, not a limitation. Think about what Manwe actually commands. The great eagles answer to him, and they're powerful enough that Gandalf treats their help as a last resort. When the eagles save Frodo and Sam from Mount Doom, when they fight in the Battle of Five Armies, when they rescue Gandalf from Orthanc, they're acting as Manwe's agents. The winds themselves obey him, which is why in the Silmarillion, when ships need to sail to Valinor or back to Middle-earth on important missions, the winds always seem to blow in the right direction at the right time. If Manwe decided to personally intervene against Sauron, the fight would be over instantly. He could command the winds to tear down Barad-dûr, send the eagles to attack Mordor, or simply manifest his presence in Middle-earth and unmake Sauron's physical form with a word. The only reason this didn't happen is because Manwe trusted in the strength and courage of elves, men, and even hobbits to resist evil on their own.